Welcome back to Sledgehammer Horror, guys. I am Ken Sledge, and let's talk horror. Now, today I am joined by the amazing Jerry Hammond. Jerry, how you doing today, man?
Pretty good, brother.
Dude, it is an honor to have you. I'm very, very excited to have you here. But before we talk about why you're here, Jerry, I would like for the people that don't know you to get to know you a little bit. From an early age, your family distilled a love of the macabre in you. From your dad, mostly, you guys would watch scary movies, go to haunted houses, things like that. Um, but in teen years, you came to love the lower B movies, the low budget movies. You remember the original Blob, which absolutely amazing. The Thing, Poltergeist, and a little bit later in life, came across podcasting, and that's how you and I actually hooked up, was from you doing podcasting, and you started to like devour horror themed podcasts and creepy pasta type podcasts, and that's when you decided Scary Jerry was. That's when he was born. He
That's when
started to
Scary
different.
Jerry was born.
Yeah. Now you host two podcasts now. Your passion project is an anthology series of mostly original stories, as well as curated stories that you find scary. And the other one is a pop culture podcast where you find the dark side of any given topic. So we know that you found podcasts later in life. You started listening to a lot of podcasts and decided you wanted to do it. But what really gave you that driving force to say, you know what, I'm going to start a podcast and I'm going to start doing this for myself?
To be perfectly honest, I decided that I thought I could do it better because, like, there's a million creepypasta podcasts out there that just read the same, like, 8 stories over and over and over. And I was like, these things aren't even really that scary. I can do that shit better.
Right.
And so I started writing, and I've always liked to write, but this was the first time that I actually put my creativity out into the interwebs.
And it's one of those things where all your stories original, or is it's like 80% original, 20%?
Yeah, I would
uh
say probably about 80/20. I mean I did go through a little bit there where I did some Brothers Grimm because I had an old book of Brothers Grimm. But if I don't do something that's original, I always make sure that, at the beginning of the show that I let people know, just give credit where credit's due.
sure. And that's the way that it should be. We don't want to take credit for other people's work. We've seen it happen way too much, and it's just not cool, guys. um Now I do have the links for your podcast and social media all down in the description, guys, so make sure that you're following and listening for the podcast down below. But did want to make a very special announcement tonight. So Jerry, do you want to let people know what you're going to be doing with the podcast?
Yeah, for those out there that have been listening to the show that are regular darklings, if you will, we are going to be combining the two shows into just one show. So it's going to be a little bit of a grab bag. It might be some story that I read and it just made me, lose a little bit of sleep over it or something. It might be an original story. I do, when I write the original stories, it takes me about a month from concept to finished product. So just in a way to make sure that I'm getting content out there more regularly for listeners, I've
Uh-huh.
decided to combine the two because I can bang out, a dark side of the nerd in a half an hour. It's
Sure.
just because I'm a little bit of an elephant brain when it comes to useless trivia about stupid things. So that's why I do that. And it just makes more sense at this point to kind of combine the two and streamline the process a little bit. A lot of this came from when I joined the network. I'm part of Anthology Horror Podcast Network,
Uh-huh.
and just to try to streamline things and just make it more clean and easy to find and follow.
And which site are you going to be using? Which one of the platforms will you be using as a
Um,
permanent home now?
I'm 90% sure that we're going to be just using the dark side of the nerd uh, name going forward, but we're going to tweak it a little bit. I'm toying around with the idea of Demented Dark Side of the Nerd, just kind of
Putting
combining the
them
two.
Yeah.
So, be on the lookout for we've got some new cover art in store for it. I think you're all going to like it. So,
Well, and like I said, all those links are down in the description, guys. So make sure you're joining the family. Make sure you're subscribing to the podcast, and make sure you're following on social media because it really does help the channels grow more than you know, especially on the podcasting networks. Make sure you're leaving a review. So it really, really does help the podcast to grow and expand to a larger audience, which is really friends that come onto the show is trying to help expand that audience. So make sure you're doing that, especially if you're into the creepy pasta, scary type of stuff. This is really the best place for you to go and check it out. So, a lot of people do the creepy pasta type stuff. A lot of people do horror movie reviews, stuff like that. Now, in order for you to be doing all this type of stuff, Jerry, horror had to start for you somewhere. So now, my
yes,
friend, I would like to go back to the past and talk about what it was that got you started in the horror genre, your first horror movie. And Jerry, your first horror movie was.
Squirm.
And what I love about this movie is it takes such a simple concept of worms, and makes it absolutely terrifying. So, do you remember about how old you were the first time you had seen Squirm?
I would say that was I know where I watched it first, and that would have been back in the day on USA Up All Night with Rhonda Shear and Gilbert Godfrey. They used to do that on the weekends, and they would just show these old movies, from like 10 o'clock till 4 a.m. And I think that would have been when I watched it, and I'd say probably 12 or 13, right in that middle school age. Very impressionable young mind.
Yeah. And again, it's a movie that, especially at a young age, you're watching a movie like this and you're like, what in the heck is going on? And it's a movie that, it really is. Practical effects in this movie are absolutely phenomenal, absolutely mind-blowing practical effects. So we let you watch it on USA Network Up All Night, which we all used to love. But do you remember who you were with the first time you had watched it?
I was actually by myself
Even better.
because see where I grew up, I was quite rural. Like my nearest neighbor was about a mile away, and before you reach the age of driving around and drinking beers and trying to get laid, you sit at home on the weekends. So yeah, I watched quite a few and they were crazy old movies, some of the stuff they do, but I'm glad that you hit on the practical special effects because I would take a low budget, well performed practical effect any day of the week over a big budget CGI, MCU type movie. It's just
100%.
lights hitting objects. That's what it's all about.
Dude,
And
I could not agree more.
it's so funny. Have you ever noticed the similarity between Squirm and then I call it the remake? It's Slugs.
Oh yeah.
Like
Oh
it's
yeah.
almost the exact same movie.
hmm And
And
I don't. There's just something about Squirm though, because slugs are inherently gross. There's something about slugs that are inherently gross. I don't. I mean, worms. I don't think there's something inherently gross about worms. Something inherently maybe mysterious because you can cut them in half; they can keep living. We use them for
yeah,
fish bait, whatever. But I think that was another thing. Is there something that is so inherently uh
I think it's
harmless?
the familiarity of it. Everybody who's ever gone fishing when they were, 6 years old with their grandpa had to learn how to put a worm on a hook.
Yeah.
And they're so I think what it is that they're so benign,
Yeah.
that there really aren't spoiler alert, there really aren't worms that bite. They just weren't, I mean, maybe you could consider a leech like that, but that's a different kind of critter. But there's just so many great scenes in that movie where, it's just like, when you first watch it and you're like, okay, here's this big city boy who is fish out of water from square one. And I don't even think you're really meant to like him. He's kind of a, like when he's riding the bus and he's walking through the bus aisle and he's banging he's got all this stuff. He's got like a tennis racket, a fishing pole, 3 suitcases, a duffel bag. And he's just like sitting in the way back of the bus and he's walking up to the front of the bus, just bumping everybody along the way, knocking his way through. And then by the time he finally meets this girl that he went to meet, all of his stuff is gone.
Right.
And then he gets in the, you move from that and you move into that scene when he's in the diner, the soda shop or whatever, and he orders an egg cream. And the lady just looks at him like, "What on earth are you talking about?" And he's like, "Oh, it's just a chocolate soda with a little bit of milk in it to foam it up at the top." And then he takes a sip and there's a worm in it. And it bites him on his
Yeah.
lip and he throws it all over. And then we got to talk about the cop.
Yeah.
I'm terrible with names, but I know that guy has been a staple for just being that asshole cop in just about every film that he's been in. And he's like, "Why would you go and do such a thing like that?" And he's like, "I didn't do nothing." And he's like, "You need to leave and I need to not see you again."
See, and this is one of those movies that um it's so cheesy now watching it. Yeah, but when you're a very young person watching it, it really does stick with you. And there's one scene in particular that stuck with me, and I wonder if it's the same one that got you, because there's two that I really want to talk about. But we're not here to talk about me, Jerry. So what was the scene that affected you the most?
Okay, so there's a shower scene where the lady's taking a shower
Yep.
and the worms come out of the shower head, like right when she gets out of the shower. And on a stack of Bibles, I stopped taking showers for a month because if I didn't take a shower, I could make sure that no worms were going to come up out of that shower head at me. It was just because the way that they just like oozed out of the shower head was, and there's something about that ooze effect that just gets me. You touched a little bit about, with the blob, the scene in the blob when he pokes the blob with a stick and it like oozes up the stick and gets on his arm. There's just something about that just, you know, gives me the willies.
Well, and it's again because I've always thought it was because worms are just so inherently harmless that you watch this movie and it's just like it's so over the top, it's so ridiculous. Like when they open up that door and there's just all the worms right there. That's another scene for me that is just like, what are we doing here? Like, holy crap.
Now,
It
was
sticks
that,
with
are
me.
you, now there's two door scenes. Are you talking towards the end when they're in the house and they open the door?
Yes.
Because the other one that was creepy as hell was when they opened the door to the worm truck because there's a worm farm apparently.
That's how it all started. Was
Yeah,
the
and
radioactive worm farm.
he opens the door to the back of the truck and there's like worms everywhere, but there's like a skeleton in the worms, like somebody was in there and got eaten. That was pretty intense too because they were
Yeah.
just like falling out of the eyes and stuff and
See, and it's
crazy.
funny 'cause that's a great segue into my next question. So, we know which scene it was that affected you the most, but what would you say your favorite scene from Squirm is?
Okay, I would have to say it's a tie. I have two. I really love this entire movie, and I would say it's a tie between two scenes. The first one would be when the sheriff and his girlfriend are getting busy at the jail, and like just this huge wall of worms washes over them, and she's like, "Ooh, your hands are all slimy," and he's like, "It's not my hands." And then they both turn and they scream when they get covered with the worms. That one's pretty fun. And the I don't know if you'd call him the villain, but he's more like the other male suitor that's in love with this singular redhead female. Um, and he falls in the worms and they're like all crawling and sticking out of his face. And that kind of goes back to the whole practical effects thing because they're all like each one had a little wire in it and they were wiggling around and you could see where they were like burrowing out of his skin and he's just like, "Oh," and then
Yeah,
you think he's dead and then he shows up at the house. It's like he becomes friends with the worms or something and they give him a pass so he can try to kill the two and it's crazy.
yeah.
It's
See,
just
and that's
bonkers
the one for
fun.
me, man. Like that boat. when he gets the worms in his face. Like that's one that I think is just such an iconic moment in this film that it's impossible not to bring that part up when you're talking about this movie.
Now, can we take a second and talk about that guy's unibrow? Like that guy had a black line from eyeball to eyeball. It was crazy. But it's funny, you go back in the day and it's like almost like they didn't care as much about having like that perfect looking person in different roles. And
Right.
like he had a little bit of a snaggle tooth and it was just, but you go back and you look at the bands and stuff from that era. A lot of those bands would hurt photographs, I'm pretty sure. But no,
Like the outfield.
right, right. It's just like what do you there's just so much that I love about this movie. It's just, and it's one of those movies that it's kind of the thing. If anybody gives me the chance to talk about a movie, I'm probably going to talk about this one because
Sure.
it's also not on a lot of people's radar. There are a lot of people that are like, "Oh, I love horror movies." And I was like, "Oh, so you've seen Squirm?" And they're like, "No, what the hell's that?" You know. And then I
It was
get to,
definitely a low budget film that did not get the recognition it deserved.
I like to think of it as a diamond in the rough, if you will. It's one of those that you know, if you can get past the cheesy acting and stuff and just watch it for what it is, it's a brilliant movie. And it's one of those that you can throw on and you can just kind of have on in the background, or you can sit down and watch the whole thing through. You're not really going to miss anything if you miss a scene.
Right.
But
And it is. It's mindless fun. It's a mindless fun horror movie. And whenever we talk about someone's first horror movie, I always like to ask because obviously now in Hollywood, remakes, requels, sequels, kind of all the rage. Is Squirm a movie you'd like to see them take another stab at in today's world of film?
I I would err on the side of caution and say no, just because I feel like the biggest thing that Hollywood needs is fresh content. We don't
Sure.
need another remake, another reboot, another re envisioning, another re anything. Make something new and original. Something that, like it's almost like when we got this big push in the early 2000s, when the torture porn came on the scene. And we had Hostel with Eli Roth's Hostel, and that came out, and people were just like, I can't believe they're making movies like this.
Mm.
And yeah, he did go on and he made like two or three more or something like that. I know it became a series, but it's just one of those things where when that new fresh thing hit, because nobody was doing that, I would make the argument that without Hostel coming along, we wouldn't have had movies that were so popular like Saw, like that just go in for a dime, in for a dollar, and they double down on that extreme gore, extreme violence, and so what I want from Hollywood, if somebody in Hollywood is listening to me right now, give me something new, something that's not been recycled, something
Sure.
that's not been done a million times, just something new and fresh and exciting. That's what I want.
Well, especially because a movie like Squirm, they would CGI it up today, and I just don't think it would live up to any type of expectation of what we
No,
were hoping for. So
no.
that's where my fear is.
Maybe if they could pull Tom Savini in and get him to work some of his magic, maybe. But I don't think I'd get excited about it.
Oh no, I'm with you. It's not something I could be excited about either. Because obviously, I'd watch it, and I think the good part about a remake of a movie like Squirm, not a lot of people know this film. So if you do a remake, a lot of people are going to go back and watch the original and kind of see what they missed out on in that original film. And I think that's very important. If you're going to
Yeah,
do a remake, to do it on a movie like that where people can actually go back and enjoy what we loved about this movie because they missed it the first time around because it's such an understated movie, like you said. I'd rather see a remake of Squirm than a remake of Halloween or The Exorcist.
oh
Yeah.
God, yes. That do not get me started about Halloween, or we're going to be here all night. Um, okay, can I throw a couple punches? Can I do that?
Bring it.
Okay. Um, Rob Zombie, when he came on the scene with House of a Thousand Corpses, absolutely loved it, even though it was mostly recycled from other. Um, there wasn't a lot of new ideas. It was basically every great slasher movie made into one.
Sure.
And I liked it because it got people fired up about horror again. But I'm just going to leave it right here. We didn't need a Rob Zombie Friday Halloween. We didn't need most of the other, because to me he's a one trick pony. And here's what the biggest thing is: being a fan of a genre, because he is an absolute horror fan. He loves everything about horror. Doesn't necessarily make you a good director to create it.
Sure.
That's just my thoughts. So many of his movies that I've watched, and I'll watch them. I won't just be, because I'm not one of those like, oh, I'm not watching that. I'm not watching that.
Sure.
I'll watch just about anything. But to me, it feels like his stories, it's always like hillbilly rapists.
You're not
It
wrong.
feels like he shoehorns that into every freaking movie he makes.
Yeah.
So,
And it does. It gets really old. That's why, like, when it comes to Rob Zombie's Halloween, especially, the original Rob Zombie's Halloween from '07, I love the theatrical cut of that film. I hate the director's cut.
oh
I
yeah.
can't stomach it. It's just something about that, SA is just a big trigger for me. So I can't watch that type of stuff. It just doesn't do anything for me. Um, so, we know about Squirm, obviously being your first horror movie, Jerry, and what that means to you. But now I do want to throw a little bit of a curveball at you here for a second. My little buddy Ghostface is here, and he has a question for you. What's your favorite scary movie, Jerry? What is your favorite horror movie of all time?
Favorite of all time would have to be The Thing.
Yeah,
Carpenter's The Thing. I'm not talking
sure.
about The Thing from outer space.
Right. And I think that's probably the response I get the most is the thing. And I get it. I understand it. I mean, it's got the best practical effects of all time. It's got the most underrated score of all time. The amount of anxiety and dread, the, it's hard to root against the thing. It's such a great movie that was made so well. I put it above Halloween. I put it above Escape from New York. I put it above all these things. I think it's John Carpenter at his best. As John Carpenter's The Thing.
Well, I would agree with that. The practical special effects in that was just mind blowing. The my favorite one on that would be the crab head. Like when they're doing the autopsy and the head falls off and scurries away and they kill the rest of it. They think they got it. And that just like, again, it was squishy. It was visceral. It was
Yeah,
gross, and like a mouth would open up where there shouldn't be a mouth,
right.
and chomp a dude in half, like there's so much to like about it. And then even today, what was that, 81, 83, something like that when it came out, here we are 40 years later, and people are still arguing about the ending,
Hmm.
about who, were they both the thing? Was one the thing? Was one, and it was just, it's like, okay, well, one of them took a sip of a Molotov cocktail. So I don't think a human could do that. But
I'm McCready's The Thing. I'm just gonna throw that out there.
you think McCready was the thing?
Oh yeah,
See, I would disagree, because McCready, when in that final scene, you had McCready was breathing and you could see the foam and the steam, or the steam from his breath coming out. And can't remember his name. Told you I'm bad with names. The other guy.
yeah.
The other guy grabs his bottle of Jameson that he had made these Molotov cocktails with, takes a good swig of it, hands it back to McCready, but he has no breath coming out.
Okay,
So
that's fair.
to me, that means he's the thing and McCready's not. And
Right.
McCready's like, well, we'll just sit here for a while then and see what happens.
Right.
Now, see, that's one. I don't know if you've ever watched the sequel they made to it. I felt like the sequel fell short. I feel like there could be like Ghostbusters Afterlife worthy sequel to the thing
Uh-huh.
where they really do it right. Because to me, the sequel that came out in like, yeah, I think it was 89 or 90 didn't really, it just fell short to me.
Right. See, and I've seen the prequel from 2011 as well, and it's just all CGI. It's just really awful, and I'm just not a fan of that one either. So, I mean, I would love to see them try to do a real sequel to the thing. I think that would absolutely work. Um, but it is what it is. So if they left the thing as just a standalone and never touched that again, I'd be fine with that too,
Oh,
because I
yeah.
think again it's a perfect film. And when they tried to do that prequel in 2011, they did all this CGI instead of practical, which sucks because they filmed it all practically, and then the studio went and did a bunch of CGI and made it look like complete dog crap. So yeah, that's one film you can leave alone, in my opinion. It's like American Werewolf in London. We don't need to try to touch that again. It was done so
So,
well. Please just leave it alone. Leave it
do
the way
we
it is.
do we need to talk about American Werewolf in Paris?
Doesn't exist. Don't know what you're talking about. Never heard of it. I'm completely confused right now. So, so I've had an amazing time, Jerry, talking about your first horror movie and your favorite horror movies. But before I let you go, I do want to bounce back real quick to Squirm. And what we're going to do here, my friend, is rank this movie on a skull count. Now, we're not ranking Squirm on acting, production, score, direction. We're not being critics. What we're doing here is strictly ranking this movie on how much it affected you on your first viewing. So, zero skulls being not effective, five being extremely effective. You can use half and quarter skulls anywhere in the middle. Jerry, what would your ranking of Squirm be?
I would say probably a solid four skulls.
Mhm. And that's a fair ranking because, like I said, the movie it affected you so much you didn't want to shower, you only wanted to have a bath. So you got to have some pretty high skull points at that ratio. So I do want to remind everybody one more time because, guys, we are at the end of the third act. The credits are about to roll and the curtain's about to drop. But before that happens, not only do I have all of Jerry's social media links in the description, I have all the links for the podcast as well. So whichever platform you're listening on, all you gotta do is click the links down in the description, subscribe to the podcast, and follow Jerry on social media so you can become a part of his ever-growing family as well. Jerry, please don't go anywhere, my friend. I got a couple more questions for you.
Right
Um,
on.
Everybody else, if you haven't already, please like and subscribe. It really does help to grow the channel more than you know. And follow Sledgehammer Horror on social media. All our links are down in the description as well. But until next time, keep talking horror, stay what you are, and we'll see you guys soon.